We've been busy in the kitchen, as you might imagine. Canning season is starting. The cucumbers are coming in. I've got just a few tomatoes starting to come in. So today I wanted to share a recipe with you for a southern chow chow. And if you've never had chow chow before, it's a relish or a condiment. And a good friend of mine, when I was doing craft shows, Pam Brown from Good Heinz, made a swamp cabbage chow chow that I absolutely loved. And when I found this chow chow recipe in Southern Living magazine a few months ago, actually it was last summer, so it was a year ago, I had to try it. Now, I don't remember how accurate this is to Pam's recipe. I'm sure there's many differences, but I've got to say, I think I ate every single jar by myself. It was that good. And it's basically cabbage, tomatoes, onion, bell pepper, and then a bunch of pickling spices. So we'll make that together later. I've already spent the morning washing, preparing the vegetables and put them through the food processor. So I'll show you in a few minutes where we are on that. And then we're also going to be having the Schlotzsky's bread and sandwiches in the next day or two. So look at this. I've got 7 of these. These are the large tuna fish cans, 12-ounce tuna fish cans, I believe. And this bread, and now there's cornmeal on it, but it came out absolutely beautiful in these cute little pans, which is just the perfect little sandwich size. So made those, and I'm so happy with it. I don't know if you'll remember, but I made it in loaves. I made 2 separate loaves and I cut the loaves in half, and it was way too thick. I ended up having to really cut the loaves into 3, and I'm not real good about slicing. So this is a much better solution. I didn't want to spend the money at Amazon on 5-inch cake pans. Those tuna fish cans are just perfect. And the other thing I did is yesterday pulled out the new ball canning book, and on page 155 is their Cucumber-and-Charred red onion relish. And so yesterday I had cleaned all my cucumbers, and this is that relish. And I labeled my jars. I got 4.5 pints. A half pint is in the refrigerator, waiting for my husband to test it. I like it. It's got a little bit of kick to it. And if he likes it, this is something I'll make with you later in the season. But today's recipe is for a chow chow. And if you guys have never tried a chow chow, it is a condiment or a relish. You can put it in deviled eggs, on hot dogs and hamburgers. I like it just on crackers. You can make a fancy dip with cream cheese and add it in, or pour it over the top of it. But it's just a really yummy thing. And I should not admit to this, but I think I ate every jar of it last year. It was that good. It's very good. So I saw this recipe in Southern Living magazine about a year ago, and I don't remember which issue it was in, but regardless, it's searchable on southernliving.com. And this we are going to make today because I know I loved it last year, so I'm going to start making it. I probably made it 4 times last year, so we'll make this today. I went ahead and prepared the things that needed to go through the food processor, but we'll show you that over there once we get to cooking. The other thing that I'm kind of in the process of making is my mom's best friend's pickle relish recipe. And this I did make last year also. And the pickle relishes, cucumbers, anything like that, you pretty much have to brine them and then let the water, the liquid that's released from the cucumbers and other vegetables release. And generally that's an overnight kind of thing. So this will take a couple, actual time, very little time to prepare, but you just have to wait overnight. So we'll be back with both of those because I know that's a good recipe too. And I'll link the recipes, of course, down in the description. But for now, let's get over there and I'll show you what we've got going on. This is 1 2-pound head of cabbage, 5 Roma tomatoes. Their recipe calls for any green colored heirloom. I'm using Roma, that's what I've got. 22 ounces of white onions, a green bell pepper, a red bell pepper, and a 1/4 cup of canning and pickling salt. Now all the vegetables I ran through the food processor pretty quickly. I had everything all cleaned and chopped to go into the food processor when I started that process, and that probably takes about 5 minutes to do that. And then I put it in my big mixing bowl and put the salt on top of it and mix that up really well. Then I covered it with saran wrap and put it into my refrigerator where it's been for the last 8 hours. The next part of this process is something that I highly recommend that you do. If you taste this cabbage at this point, it is super salty, and the brine that was on it has to be removed. The brine has already done its job. The job is to season the vegetables and to kill anything that's in there that we don't want in there, that will keep it safe. So this particular cabbage, and what I did last year, which I remember to do shortly after, is once I've rinsed it off the first time, I'm going to put it back into the big bowl and then let it sit covered by water, kind of massage it a little bit. You're trying to condense it to release the excess salt, and I let it sit for a couple minutes, and then I go through the process again. Dump it into the colander, rinse it off, kind of let that water drain out of it, and then soak it again in the water in the big bowl. So I'm going to go through this process several times. I think it was about 3 times total, until it was just the right amount of saltiness for my family. And you, of course, are going to do that for whatever salt level you like in your household. This part probably took about 10 minutes total, but what I find is I let it sit in that bowl of water and I go do something else while it's kind of marinating in the water. Now, one of the things that I do is pull out the jars I'm going to need. This particular recipe calls for 5 pints. I'm going to do an extra one just in case. And then we're going to get our brine mixture ready, and that includes white vinegar. And we're going to use 5 cups of white vinegar. So I've got my 5-cup measure, and then I'm going to add in an extra cup to that. Then 3 cups of white granulated sugar. This is a 1/2 cup measure, so I'll do this 6 times. And then our pickling spices. So I have ground allspice. It's going to take a tablespoon of that. This is a 1/2 tablespoon measure, so I'll do 2 of those. And then a 1/2 tablespoon of dry mustard. Then we have a little spicy component. You're going to add 2 to 3 teaspoons of a dried chili or crushed red pepper flakes. I'm just going to use a couple of little sprinkles of cayenne pepper. Then we'll put this onto the stovetop. You'll want your stovetop on high heat. You're going to mix that up good and then cover it and bring it to a boil. And now we're going to go back and do another one of our washing and draining episodes here. Same process. It's soaking in just water. Get it into the colander. Get most of that water out. And you'll see I do rinse it again. Massage it a little bit. this makes you appreciate all these vegetables as you're doing this process. Back over on the stove top, I've remembered to cover it, so we'll get that boiling a little quicker now. And you'll see we have our rinsed, drained veggies ready to go in. This has been boiling for 10 minutes, so we're going to add our cabbage mixture to the brine, and then we'll mix it up good. You'll want your burner set on medium-high. You're going to cover this and then bring it to a boil. Uncover it and then reduce your heat to medium-low and just simmer it undisturbed for 10 minutes. My timer's going off. It's been 10 minutes, so we can uncover it, and we'll move the pot over to the other side of the kitchen where my jars are all set up and ready to go. I've pulled out what I'm going to need. So I've got my canning funnel, a slotted spoon, and you can't see it, but on the other side is my little skewer that I'm going to use for a probe to get rid of the air pockets. This recipe has plenty of the brine mixture, so I'm just working on getting as many of the vegetables out and into the jars, and then I'll fill with extra brine. You'll see I pulled out my fine mesh strainer here. I, again, just want mainly vegetables in the jars until I'm ready to top them off with the brine mixture. I'm going to be using my spatula to make sure that I get all the vegetables out of the pan and into the jars. You spend a lot of time cleaning these, chopping them, or using your food processor, so get them all out of that pan and into the jars. So a couple reminders here about safe canning. You will want to have your little probe to be sure to probe these before putting the lids on. And you'll see that I forget this step, so I'm going to have to take all of the lids off and probe them to get rid of the air pockets and then fill them up with liquid again, because as you do that, you're going to create some airspace. And that probably leads to a second little rule. Anytime you haven't done something for a while, reread your canning book, safety instructions, and your recipe, because this will help you not to forget these little steps. And you'll see here in a second, I'm going to have to, oh, there's my probe sitting there. Oops. Now, here I am. I'm going to have to take all these lids off and start over. So just a good reminder for seasoned canners and newbies all alike. Geez, I have to recreate the wheel every time, it seems like. And also remember, you're going to have to clean those rims again once you add in the brine solution and you finish doing your probing here to get rid of the air pockets. And that is simply because you have gone to all this work. You want to make sure that those lids will adhere to the top of the jar. If there's any kind of gummy, syrupy substance on there, you will not get a good seal and your product will not be safe. And then we're going to start putting the jars into the water bath. Now, this water bath has been on since I started doing the brine, so it is hot, almost to boiling. I'm putting hot jars into hot canning water. If you do cold and cold, that is fine too, just you cannot mix. You can't have cold jars going into a hot canning pot. You also want to make sure that you've got an inch of headspace above. That's using my little tongs as an indicator of how much room I have, and in that case I was just fine. We're going to put the cover on, and you want to bring this to a boil. So in my case, this is a high heat burner, and I have to be real careful. The jars really start rocking if I get it too hot, and as you can see here, I have a full rolling boil going, and that's set on pretty much a low setting. Now, this is processed for 10 minutes at boiling. Once you've reached that point, my timer goes off. I slide the pot over, take the lid off, and then let these rest for 5 minutes. Make sure that your countertop is covered with a towel or something similar that will just keep the hot jar from hitting the cold countertop and breaking. And there we have it. Our jars are done. And while I've been waiting for everything to boil and, process, I have been draining and straining the pickle relish recipe. I didn't show that because that's just a lot of repeat from what we did before. Here I have prepared the brine and it's getting ready to go on the stove. This is from my mom's best friend and it's a huge recipe, so I'm making 1/3 of the batch. That's 2 cups of vinegar, 1 1/3 cup of sugar, and a heaping 1/2 teaspoon of mustard powder and celery seed. We're going to mix that up, and again, we're going to just kind of repeat the process. We need this to come to a boil for about 10 minutes before we add the vegetables. Many canning recipes call for mustard seed or celery seed or other spices in seed form, and I don't always have them in seed form, and vice versa. Sometimes they want powder and I've got seed. There is a handy chart that I found that I will link in the description that shows how much powder versus how much seed, so you can make those conversions easily. Homemade recipes often lack specifics when it comes to the directions. So in this case, it said to simmer for 1/2 hour and seal. So I'm going to do similar to what I did for the Chow recipe, but I will increase it so it's 30 minutes overall. I'm going to get the brine to boil for 10 minutes, and then I'm going to do another 20 minutes of this mixture in the brine on high, and once it gets there, I'll turn the temperature down. This particular recipe, it had more vegetables than brine, so at the end, I just kind of divvy everything up so it fits evenly in the 5 jars. I want the vegetables covered by as much of the brine as possible, and if there's any extra, which in this case there wasn't, I would put it in the fridge. I do remember to probe to remove any air pockets and then wipe the rims of the jars before I put the lids and the rings on. The headspace on those was more like 1/2 inch than 1/4, but everything else from here on is going to be just like the other chow that we processed. We've got the water to a boil. We'll cover it for 10 minutes. And when that timer is up, we'll move the pot off the heat, take off the lid, and we're going to let that sit for 5 minutes. Then we'll move them from the hot pot to the towel on the countertop. And the next morning, we'll check to make sure the lid's sealed. Hi guys. It's the next day, the next morning, and I'm kind of cleaning up from the night before. I washed all the dishes and everything, but just putting everything away. And it does really help if you put things that you use in canning back in the same spot. I usually put this in with one of my pots that I'll be using. The little silicone bottom of the pot thing, I keep in that pot all the time, or in this drawer next to my jar lifter. And I think you noticed in the video, I may have said something. I can't find my jar lifter after the move, so I repurposed this long pair of tongs with some rubber bands on the end, and this is my do-it-yourself jar lifter. But I keep, that always goes in the same drawer right below here, and these go back across the kitchen. And I did want to mention, I saved my brine from the Chow. This is a brine that I'm going to use again. I'll make Chow multiple times throughout the season, and this will go into my fridge. Last year I threw all my brines away, and then I researched it because it seemed very wasteful. Reuse it. You can use it to brine meat. Because I'm making the same Chow recipe multiple times, I'm going to reuse this, and I'll reuse this one time, and then next time it'll probably use up all the brine, or I'll just pitch it and then I'll make a fresh one the time after. So this is going into my fridge, and I did label it so I'll remember which one it is. And then the last thing to do today before we take these down to the basement, I'm going to move you, is to label our jars. And I'm putting Chow Chow and 624, and I only did these two things yesterday, so I'll remember which is which. The cabbage one is more white. The cucumber relish is more green. So I'll remember. There's my Chow Chow label. And then this one, I'm going to put Carolyn's relish on this one to distinguish it from the other relish that I may make and that I did make already, that smoked relish. And obviously the date. And all of these rings can come off. All of these got a good seal. And to be honest with you, I don't think I've ever got one that had a bad seal. I think if you're buying your rings from reputable places, actually you want to know, if you're buying your lids from reputable places, you're okay. But I signed up for Temu last year and got their 90% off can lids. Oh, here I'm doing it wrong. See, I can't talk and do this at the same time. But anyway, Temu had the 90% off coupon when I joined, and so I used that coupon, and then I hated Temu, so I deleted it. So I did get 200 lids at a very good price, and like I said, they've been perfectly fine. But yeah, and the other part of that is having your lids work is wiping the rim off. So that's really important. When you pour this type of mixture in, this pickle mixture that has vinegar and sugar, that is very much like a syrup. And so that can get real gummy and sticky when it dries, and that can cause a lid failure. But all of these did nicely. I'll restore my lids. I'll show you where I keep those. So this is my tall pantry in my kitchen that when I moved in, I thought I would put shelves in. I think the other people use it as a coat rack. That's because it's got a hanging rack in it. But I just put my box of lids in the back of the pantry. It's hanging from a shelf, and so that's real easy to get to them. And then my finished jars, I'm going to scoot you with me on my knee scooter. This time of year, I always have a old box. This is pints. I just use pints and regular mouth at that. And I keep this up here all the time. And I'm going to add the jars that I did last night to that, and then that will go down in the basement. And hopefully I can get Rod to take that down there for me, and then I'll unload them onto the canning shelves. Thanks for being in the kitchen with me today. You helped me finish my 5 pints of pickle relish and 4 1/4 pints of Chow Chow, and those will be going down on my canning shelves. And I hope your week is going good. We'll see you next time.